they had to eliminate an Eber capo whom everyone called Berliner. In reward for turning camp informant, the Germans made Berliner head capo of the camp, and Berliner got his nickname by his continual boasting that after the war he would be in Berlin while those around him were dead. No one was safe while Berliner was alive, and the escape plan was deeply imperiled. A capo was a prisoner who was put in charge of the various work details. The capos carried either a club or a whip, which they used frequently on their fellow prisoners. More often than not, the capos were far crueler than the Germans or the Ukrainians, beating or killing a fellow prisoner without provocation. It is reported that Berliner was the worst when it came to meting out fatal or near-fatal summary punishment. One day, Berliner was summoned to one of the barracks on the pretext that a prisoner refused to get out of his bunk. Berliner lumbered into the barracks, and 2 men attacked him from behind. Several more men jumped into the fray, and soon Berliner found himself pinned down on the floor. The plan was to beat him without leaving any marks, but enough so that his internal organs would rupture, causing him to bleed to death internally. There could be no visible bruises on Berliner's body. Nothing could be done that would cause the Germans to suspect their head capo had been murdered. The beating that Berliner received was so intense that after 2 days of all-consuming agony, he was taken to what is called Camp 3, a metaphor for the gas chamber. His death also served as a very clear warning to anyone who might betray the escape plan. With Berliner gone, Leon and Sasha were able to start documenting with impunity every move the German and Ukrainians made, right down to the approximate minute. They knew when the changing of the Ukrainian guards occurred and the camp was at its weakest. They watched the mess hall and knew when the Germans and Ukrainians would be inside eating and the camp was vulnerable. Nothing went unnoticed. The escape plan was now complete, and specific assignments for that day were handed out. On October 14, 1943, the escape plan was put into action. Phase 2 was the elimination of the Germans as quietly as possible. The time established was between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. Phase 3, the mobilization for an open revolt and a mass escape, was scheduled for 5:30 p.m. The German presence was weakened because the camp commander, Franz Reichsleitner, was on leave, and without him the camp's guards had little effective leadership. 2 of Sobibor's cruelest German taskmasters, Wagner and Gomersky, were also on leave. Both men seemed to have an uncanny sixth sense, and had they been present that day, the revolt never would have happened. The blacksmiths group entered the Ukrainian barracks under the guise of routine maintenance of the furnace. They smuggled out 6 rifles. Members were told to gather up the homemade knives and axes that had been hidden in the sorting warehouses. The combat teams were assembled into 6 groups of 3 people each. In Camp 1, the Germans would be killed in the various workshops, and in Camp 2, the Germans who supervised the incinerators and the warehouses would be killed. In the confusion, another group would attack the armory and procure additional weapons. Starting at about 4 p.m., the plan was put into motion. The Putzers went into action, and because of their unique positions, their movements were not scrutinized by the Germans. The snare was about to close. The Jewish underground used the Germans' cavalier attitude and their greed to their advantage. The capos who were part of the escape plan were instructed, and as brutal as it may seem, were to use their whips on the prisoners so that the Germans would not become suspicious for if a capo seemed unusually lenient that day, the Germans would have noticed this unusual behavior and they would have started asking questions. At 4 p.m., the revolt quietly started. The camp's deputy commander, whose name was Neiman, came to a tailor's shop for his fitting of his new uniform. He unhooked his gun belt. A man by the name of Mundek, a tailor, was marking the necessary alteration on Neiman's uniform when the death blow was delivered. Neiman dropped to the ground dead. His head had been split open. A German by the name of Groshtesk was lured into the cobbler's shop to try on his new boots. Yitzhak, the shoemaker, pretended to be having some difficulty pulling Groschtesk's boots up when Arcadia Washpepper and Simone Rosenfeld snuck up behind and delivered the fatal axe blow to Groschtesk's head. A capo named Pozicki knocked on the door of a German non-commissioned officer by the name of Beckman, stating that the prisoner work detail needed some clarification of a task. Pozicki and another man entered Beckman's office. When they left, Beckman was dead. The killings quietly continued. The late Mr. Chaim Engel recalled in an interview that as he stabbed a German sergeant, he screamed out the names of his family members who had been killed by the Germans. The telephone lines were cut, severing communication between the various elements of Sobibor. This is a model of the camp, and the red X marks the building where the killings of the Germans started. Without the Germans, Ukrainian SS guards would be thrown into confusion and could not mount a quick and effective offense. During the killing of the Germans, workers smuggled out even more firearms and ammunition from the guards' barracks, and now more of the prisoners were armed. Close to 5 p.m., Capo Pozicki, who had killed the German soldier named Beckman, blew the roll call whistle a little earlier than usual. The plan was to form the prisoners in a column, and the capos would march them towards the main gate. The underground wanted to create the perception that the Germans had ordered a work detail assembled. This would allow the prisoners to get as close to the gate as possible without arousing the suspicions of the Ukrainians, and then the prisoners would take the gate by storm. We are not sure at what point in time the discipline of the prisoners broke down, and there was chaos and cohesion deteriorated. A homemade ladder was thrown against a barbed wire fence, and prisoners started climbing on it. The weight broke the fence, and Jews were now running out through a gaping hole straight into the minefields. The actions of those under the military leadership of Sasha wreaked total havoc, and the camp was in complete disarray, and the Ukrainian SS guards were completely stunned. Meanwhile, prisoners smashed through the front gates, and all bolted to freedom. Some of the prisoners broke through the barbed wire at the southwest corner of the camp and escaped. Directly in their path were the minefields that had been laid by the Germans to prevent such an escape.